Hi, I'm Mike Skirko, and I am on the board of directors for the San Francisco Independent Film Festival. And I am delighted to have the producer and the director of Push Pause with me today. And also, just to let you know, I am here to help. I am not a trained translator, but I did grow up in Japan. So,俺は本当の翻訳する人ではないですけど、一生懸命やってます。SF インディフェスは、いつもと同じね。俺は、日本の英語大好きだけど、日本語話しますから、翻訳するのは本当に難しい。頑張ります。どうぞ、紹介してください。
はい。よろしくお願いします。プッシュポーズの監督の小笹龍馬です。よろしくお願いします。
はじめまし
ブッシュ
て。
ポーズの、ブッシュポーズのプロデューサーの小原拓馬です。よろしくお願いします。
はじめまして。そう、最初の質問は、もう一つ、いっぱいありますけど、あまあ、最初は、ここはどこ？本当に。東京ですか？田舎ですか？あの、それ、OK。撮影の場所はどこでしたか？ So the question is, Coco, which is the name of the Push Pause, has a scene in it, a number of scenes. They're in a guest house called Coco. And I'm wondering where it is because it looks ancient and yet it's supposed to be set somewhere in Tokyo. So the question is, where in Tokyo? So, and my expression, Coco wa doko? Where is Coco?
これは、東京にあるゲストハウスというリアルな設定にこだわっていたので、浅草とか、秋葉原の近くの東京にあるゲストハウスになります。
その建物は本当に東京の中、田舎だと思ってた。
東京にある、本当にゲストハウスとして運営している、ゲストハウストコっていうゲストハウスがあって、実際に、宿泊とかもできるようなゲストハウスです。
So my understanding is there are guest houses like this in Japan, in Tokyo. And if you see the film and you look at the architecture, some of the stones, etc., it looks ancient, but there are some really, really old buildings in central Tokyo. I think there's less and less of them over time now, but a very beautiful setting. So push pause. まあ、英語でプッシュパーズは普通音楽とかポーズでちょっとストップ、ゆっくりになる。若い人は今日本でいつも携帯で、携帯ばかりだと思う。どこでも、電車で歩きながら、it seems that people in Japan are moving really quickly, especially the youth of today who are constantly on their cell phones, whether they're on a train or walking and they're on their cell phones. So, first question from my wife, 奥さんの最初の質問は、映画の中に携帯あんまり見えなかった。どうしてですか？ So, her first question was, in a movie called Push Pause, which is obviously about slowing down, why were there no why was there no visibility of people using cell phones? Because it seems like cell phone is such a part of the culture. どうぞ。
えっと、設定でそこまでこだわって作ったわけではないんですけど、何よりもこの映画を作るきっかけになったのが、コロナの中での、SNS だったりとか、自分自身が、外側の人とのコミュニケーションを取るのがすごく難しくなってしまったときに、この映画を作るきっかけになりました。
So one of the things that's mentioned is that the movie was basically taking place during the COVID lockdown in Japan, and as you notice, some of the scenes there with like there not being a lot of people out, there's a lot of things shut down, and the communication in general during this time was changed. A lot of people were using SNS messaging, and they were not communicating on the phone. But back to the title. So push pause
はい。
の意味は、おばあさんの話は、若い人がいつも早く。彼女は、休憩。休憩 is a word. It means relax. And at one point in the movie, there's a nice little old lady, and she keeps telling the young people, hey, this is, you young people go so fast. But, ma, I think the entire point of Push Pause, タイトルで、プッシュポーズの話、ちょっとしてください。休憩か、そういう意味。
さっきのごめんなさい。途中だったので、さっきのやつ、SNS の使うってやつ途中でごめんなさい。切っちゃってたんですけど、なんでその携帯を使わなかったかっていうところをもうちょっと話してもいいですか？
うん、どうぞ。
携帯でのコミュニケーションの前に、まず新しい家族のコミュニケーションというか、いわゆるリアルな家族ではなくて、ゲストハウスのお客さん同士で向き合うっていうあの時間も、新しい家族のあり方なんじゃないかなというふうに思って、これは、コロナの中で、すごく、あの、リアルなコミュニケーションができない状況に置かれていた人たちが、まさに、フェイストゥフェイスでお話ができるっていうことを意識して作りたかったから、スマートフォンとかでのコミュニケーションとかをそこまで入れてなかったっていう意味がありました。
So we're going back to the previous question on the lack of cell phone use, and also because it was difficult to have face-to-face communication during the COVID shutdown in Japan. Places like the guest house were places where people had face-to-face communication, and I think the point of the guest house and really the big point of the push pause in this movie is possibly that the COVID shutdown in Japan pushed pause on a lot of things and forced some of the communication to be back the way it was before, when guest houses were common, family communication was taking place around a table. And an example of young people sitting in a group today with their phones out, communicating with each other, but not doing face-to-face. And I think this movie and push pause and the commentary of the Obachan regarding QK and don't be in a hurry is one of the other things she mentions, is that you spend such a small amount of your life young and such a larger proportion old. And she was urging them not to be in a hurry. Don't be in a rush, because you need to, one, push pause. You need to, two, relax. QK has a number of meanings, but one of them really is just chill. And I think if you could summarize her communication to the people who were buzzing around her saying they were going to do this or they wanted to marry that ex-girlfriend, really it's about, hey, you need to chill. So that's another aspect that I greatly enjoyed. So one of the things, these stories are important. Youth doesn't take its time. So getting to know each other, knowing people over time, like 中国の女性、彼女の名前はシャオユシャオ
シャオル、シャオル。
ル。OK。彼女の友達は、かなり長く会いましたけど、彼は、愛と思いました。彼女は友達だけ。でも、ちょっと、communication breakdown. Like, I don't think there was a Chinese woman. Her name was Xiao Lu. She was a guest at the guest house. And her friend, who was a work friend, kind of had a love interest in her. But the reality was, it wasn't mutual. And it's a matter of, it takes time to get to know people. But I think it was very clear from the start that there probably wasn't anything there. その二人はずいぶん前から会いましたか？何年ぐらい前と思いましたか？
はい。設定で言うと、大学時代の、先輩と後輩という設定で作っていました。
大学も。
で、彼女は大学に、それこそ声優を志して、ボイスアクターを志して、上京してきて日本語を勉強し、声優になろうとしていました。で、その中で、アニメ研究会だったりとか、サブカルチャー研究会だったりとか、 っていうところに属していた二人が、接点を持ったっていう設定でした。
Right. And so in that case, she actually had known this guy who was a coworker. Previously, they were in university together. So they had known each other for quite some time, but I guess it had taken him quite a while to kind of get out of his shell and explain to her that he actually really liked her. And that brings up another point, which is that she's Chinese in Japan. And it is like, even if you're second or third generation, it's not easy to be accepted in Japanese society. And one of the things that he tells her is, hey, it's this company doesn't really like foreigners. And it doesn't sway her. She doesn't give up. She's going to stay in Japan. But the cool thing is just that, he kind of brings it up like it's going to be a surprise to her. 彼女はまあ、中国人だから、多分ね、まあ、普通の外人わかるでしょ？日本住むのは難しい。外人だから難しい。まあ、中国か韓国か、普通の、俺も、まあ、難しい。日本の会社は、まあ、大体日本人。中国人の一つは多分難しい。彼女は、まあ、はっきりわかると思う。彼女のお母さんもそのこと多分わかると思う。でも、it was interesting to me that he brought this up as a real point to tell her, hey, look, you're working for a Japanese company. They don't really like foreigners. And that's just, I mean, that's nothing new to most people who've lived in Japan. But it was interesting to me that he brought that up. And it's one of those things, if you've lived in Japan, if you've done business in Japan, this is something that's pretty common. But it didn't seem like something that really needed to be reiterated by him. I figured they would both just kind of go in that knowing that. 彼女はどのぐらい日本住みましたか？東京は初めてアパートを探すでしょ？でも、ずいぶん前から住んでた？でも、行ったり来たり？大学は中国でしょ？日本。
中国、日本の大学に通ってます。
Oh, okay. So she went to college in the United States or in Japan, but then she was just going to actually move to Tokyo and take this job. でしょ？まあ、彼女は、住むのは、大学終わったら、まあ、会社を始めて、そしてアパートを探します。
はい。
Got it. And there's also a number of things about traveling. そのバイク、株はまあ、有名な80年代の昔々のバイクだ。俺も若い時、どこでも見ることできる。でも、彼は、まあ、旅行大好きです。と言いました。いつもバイクで乗りました。彼は普通の日本人じゃないですね。So the guy on the bike wasn't really like what you consider to be your average Japanese dude. Like, he was total free spirit. He wanted to travel and ride his bike and wasn't like the typical person you'd meet in Japan. どうしてそのキャラクターは、まあ、プッシュポーズに、普通のサラリーマンともう全然違いますね。気持ちとか。He's like the antithesis of the salaried Japanese worker. And I just wondered, like, where did this character come from? どうして彼が、ここに入りました？ Why did he end up in?
僕がもともとずっとバックパッカーをやっていて、で、それこそ、アメリカ横断とかをしていたので、サンフランシスコとかにも、行ったことがまずあります。で、実際僕が、僕自身を投影したキャラクターっていうのが、ひろふみさん、ホテルのオーナーのひろふみさんだったりもしたり、劇中で出てくる、家から出たらみんな旅人だよっていうセリフがあるんですけど、そのセリフとかも実際に僕がゲストハウスに泊まってる時に、アメリカのオーナーさんに言ってもらった言葉だったりとか、そういうなんか、旅っていう文化は、僕自身の中にずっと根付いていたものなので、 それを、キャラクターに反映させたくて作りました。
Excellent. So this character is not necessarily based on himself entirely, but the director was a backpacker. バックパックするときにどのぐらいしましたか？ 1 ヶ月、2ヶ月、3ヶ月、1年どのぐらい？
いろんな国に行ったので、アメリカ自体は多分3ヶ月とかで、
いいね。
ノースカロライナから、西海岸の方まで行って、とか
So
して、
I was just asking because of the like kind of the length of travel that the bike guy had done in Japan was pretty extensive, and asking how long he had traveled and backpacked. And some of them were up to 3 months in North Carolina, some of them starting in San Francisco, but definitely saw a kindred spirit in this character, and that's why he was included in this film. Um, もう一つの質問は、さっき言ったうどんを作ることです。So in the inn, there's a lot of traditional Japanese food that takes time. And なんか果物を入れるのは、それ梅酒ですか？梅酒のようなもの？焼酎？
そうです、そうです、そうです。梅酒の、
そうですね。Okay. So when they're in the inn, and this is another like kind of taking your time, is the fruit in those bottles. Typically, it's called umeshu, which is plum wine or liquor, and it's something pretty much everybody makes. You take a bunch of plums, you put it in a jar, you put shoyu, not shoyu, shochu in sugar, and you let it sit. And the more you let it wait, the more it tastes like plums. So it's one of those things that you have to have patience. And the little lady, Oba-chan, she kept telling everyone it wasn't quite ready. And then she drank it with Xiaolu, and she drank it early. And they were like, oh, it's not ready. And it's a matter of you have to wait, and you have to wait, and you have to be patient. So I saw that as a really interesting part of traditional foods in Japan that people would look at and not necessarily know that. The other one is the stomping of the noodles. So you see them kind of walking on plastic with there's dough underneath it, and they're making udon noodles from scratch. And instead of kneading the dough or rolling the dough like they would do normally with other noodles globally, they cover it with plastic and they use their feet on top of the noodles, and then they serve the noodles. Now, all of these foods that were prepared, including the onigiri, everything is by hand, everything by feet, everything with time. So, まあ、映画の中に食べ物は、休憩、ゆっくり、それも、大切ですか？映画の中。So was that important to the movie?
はい。実は、この映画の一番、プッシュポーズっていうタイトルの前にもともと、味噌スープっていうタイトルでした。というのが、お味噌汁を飲むときに、なんか心がほっとする瞬間があって、その瞬間だけは、なんか焦ってる時間とかを、忘れることができる。なんか、我々日本の文化として、まず、海外の人にこの映画届けたいよねっていうふうに思ったときに、日本人がその、お味噌汁を飲むっていう瞬間だったりとか、なんかご飯を食べるっていうところは、すごく、次の、例えば、問題に対して向き合う前のタイミングというか、しっかりと、自分自身をちゃんと休めて、向き合うっていう時間がすごく大切です。で、
Okay.
日本のことわざで、戦う前にご飯を食べて、しっかりと、向き合う時間を作るっていうのがあるぐらい、我々にとって食の文化はとても大事にしています。それを海外の人に見てほしかったです。
So the food was actually really important. And prior to naming this movie Push Pause, they were thinking of naming the first title was going to be miso soup. And it's the food aspect is one of those things that gives you a chance to relax almost in a meditative way when you're drinking miso soup. And it is something that gives you the ability to kind of get through difficult things. And it is it's a really important part of Japanese culture. So the food and the soup and all of the things that go into the soup are really important, and different activities. There's certain foods you eat before those activities. And yaki onigiri mo subarashikatta. So the grilling of the onigiri, the rice ball, was also really important and really traditional. Like it's frankly, it's hard to find decent onigiri in a lot of places outside of Japan, but places that actually grill it also really rare. And it was a really cool thing to see that element in the movie. So,最初の普通のオーディエンスの質問は、映画はいくらでしたか？最初から終わるまで。バジェットは？
それ、小原さんが話した方がいい。
そうですね。今、現状多分1500万ぐらいです。全部で。
1500万、今の円高は1500、多分、
1
about
万、
$90,000, I think.
yeah.
About. So for this movie, it was about start to finish about $90,000. Andもう一つ。そう、普通のオーディエンスの質問は、
はい
山本ナイル、
はい。
ゆきたかし、三河優吾、他の映画は出ましたか？今。
今すごいいっぱい出てる女優さん、俳優さんですね。日本ですごく活躍されてる方です。はい。
Okay. So I was just asking briefly if the actors and actresses in the film have been in other films, and the answer is yes, quite a few of them. So I'm sure pretty easy to look that up if you guys want to check it out. And also, このフィルムはあなた初めて他のフィルムを作りましたか？
僕は今回が長編作初めてです。
いいね。本当に素晴らしかった。So I just asked him if he'd done any other movies, and he said no, this is his first film. And I've seen the film twice, absolutely loved it. My wife and I both watched the movies, and this one was start to finish beautiful, perfect, and spoke to so many things that I see are classic bits of Japan and Japanese culture, and in many, many different places. And also wanted to ask a question about Iwabuchi Ryuto, cinematographer, because the cinematography in this film is incredible. It's so beautiful. And so Iwabuchi さんもいろいろ最初じゃなくて他の映画も作りましたでしょ？
岩渕くんは今でこそ、この映画2021年に撮影してるんですけど、去年とか彼は4作ぐらい映画を撮ってるんですが、ここでの話が初めての映画ですね。
Okay, so he's done 4 other projects, and this was the first one on this one. Because start to finish, 田舎の場所はどこでしたか？神奈川？
神奈川。
Yes.
神奈川の秋でしょ？
はい。
So Kanagawa is outside of Tokyo. It's a very, very beautiful place in the country in Japan. And you could tell by seeing the colors beginning to change in the trees that it's fall. Like Japan has 4 very distinct seasons, and it's really beautiful to see in a place like Kanagawa where the trees change color, where you get a feeling of real country. And interesting also in the country, カブ乗る人、彼は田舎好きだけど、住むのは絶対できないでしょと言ってた。俺も、若い時、東京住んでた。今、カリフォルニア州の田舎。若い時、田舎住むのは絶対無理。でも、お年寄りになる時に田舎するのは、いいじゃない。休憩。So, I was just saying it's interesting that when the bike guy rode into the country in Kanagawa, and he was saying, wow, like, I could never live here because there's nothing going on. It's country. I know exactly how he feels. I grew up in Tokyo. Now I live in the country in the Santa Cruz Mountains. As you get older, just like Oba-chan says, QK, you can relax, you can chill in the country and not have to go so fast. And I think that's one of the things of Kanagawa, Tokyo. When you compare the two, Tokyo is 1,000 miles an hour. Kanagawa is nothing. And each time I go to Japan, まあ、12月東京行きました。今回は、まあ、週末、群馬行きました。群馬も神奈川と同じ。何にもない。夜は何にもない。温泉、旅館、それだけ。Tokyo, 24 hours a day. The country in Japan is ancient. And it's interesting to see in the movie that you get a real glimpse into both, because watching the scenes change was beautiful, and also more commentary on slow. And when we're talking about the two characters, one had SR400 そのバイクよくわかる。80年代のそれもわかる。カブ50でしょ ?125? 50?
50cc.
50. Okay, so you have two bikes in the movie. One is the 400. You can go on a freeway on a 400 in Japan. The other is the Cub. And the Cub is a classic. It's a 50cc. You cannot go on the freeways. And when the two guys, the guy with the 400 and the guy with the 50, were talking, he's like, you traveled where? Back roads only? Because to go all over Japan on a 50, it takes a long time. まあ日本でリンドって知ってる？まあ俺自転車するときに、まあ、日本の山乗りました。small roads in Japan. When I pictured this guy on his 50 and you realize how much of Japan he's covered on this bike, it's kind of crazy because there are roads in Japan that are little tiny mountain back roads and you can take them legally on the 50. But man, you're going on some crazy, windy, through the country, tiny little roads, very unusual and very different. So this is another like awesome part of the film. Like when those two talked about 450, I'm like, oh wow, this is huge. Yeah. So really, really like that. And also another part of I think Japan culture that is beautiful in the movie is batting center. That is classic Japan. So there's a baseball batting center. These are so popular in Japan, and also with golf, but they're tiny and they're usually meshed in so the balls don't go over the buildings. But people would go to these places and just practice baseball with the machine. You really don't see that so much in the US. In other countries, there's not batting center. And the name of the batting center was Home Run. And it's funny to see that was a business also time-wise perfect. COVID, Corona, that he had to shut the business down because during the shutdown in Japan, so many businesses were almost impossible to run. And I'd say a batting center, because everybody is close, would be one of the ones where they're like, that's it, you can't be open. And, effectively, you're going to go out of business. And they mentioned the Olympics in Japan. So Olympics 2020 in Japan, one never happened because of COVID. So they pushed out Olympics 2020 to 2021, where it did happen. And この映画は2020か2021いつでしたか
2021年の10月に撮影しています。まさに東京オリンピックとパラリンピックが終わった1ヶ月後に撮影しています。
前に終わる
終わった後。
Well, okay. So it was just after the Tokyo Olympics ended. And that's what the guy in the baseball center says. He's like, they could do the Olympics, but I can't run my business. And they can do the Olympics, which has a ton of people, but what about me? And it was just an interesting timepiece to see that this had happened and it was affecting people everywhere. The other one was when he was walking down the street.まあ、彼もの名前もちょっと忘れたけど、若い人、バッティングセンターで働いている人、彼は
貨物、貨
何
物、貨
貨物。
物。
貨物は、まあ、一回夜で歩きながら、店が閉まった、閉まった、閉まった、閉まった、閉まった。それどこでしたか？
あれも本当ゲストハウスの近くです。浅草とかの近く。
浅草。So there was one Tomotsu with the hair who was working at the batting center. He was walking at night and walking in an area that was just shut down. And I looked at that as, I mean, it was just a classic Corona or COVID shutdown in Japan, where it almost looks surreal to see a place that's usually bustling with activity to have everything shuttered. So really kind of amazing. That was spot on and fantastic.最初のシーン、素晴らしかった。奥さんの、お母さんの髪、海に入れるときに、髪がまた帰ってきました。多分映画の中にいろんな好きなことありました。それが最高。This was the scene where she takes a lock of her mother's hair and she puts it on the beach, and you think, okay, it's going to float out to sea. And then they're like, whoa, wait, it's coming back. And first I thought, oh, mistake? No, intentional. まあ、笑ってる。どうしてそのシーンはこれにしましたか？
なんか、この映画の良さっていうのは、それこそジーンとくる、グッとくるところもあれば、やっぱちょっと笑える。それこそヤーモンと、シャオの、告白のシーンのように、ちょっと笑える要素だったりとか、悲しくなりすぎないっていう部分とか、なんかこの人たちが次どういうふうに生きていくんだろうっていうのが見えてくるようなものがいいなって思ったので、ある種、完全に成功させたくないねっていう、なんかそのミステイクすら愛せるような、なんかそういう二人が描きたかったから、あのシーンはああいう風にしました。
Yeah, so that was fantastic, and he mentions that it was intentional to be kind of a light and happy ending, and also that with it going back and forth, there was some intention there, and it was definitely planned at the end to end just like that. Probably, for me, the best film is when I see a film, and usually I think, I have a friend. Oh, I know someone else. I think I know people who want to see this movie. And now that I've seen the movie, I can think a lot of my friends who have been to Japan with me, friends who have never been to Japan. This is, to me, one of the more perfect glimpses into Japanese society, Japanese culture, Japanese landscape, city versus country. So my plan is to introduce my friends to your film, because it really is a gateway and a view into Japan. It's beautiful. So I would say, absolutely, please keep making beautiful films about Japan. So, まあ、この映画本当に大好きでした。見るときに一番いい映画、何でも映画見るときに、友達が見たいなと思ってた。この映画はぴったりその気持ち何回も何回もしました。今日、2時間前に奥さんと一緒に見ました。彼女は終わったら、素晴らしかったと言っていました。本当に最初から終わるまで、彼女は何回も東京行きましたけど、あなたの映画見ると美しいな気持ちが、このうちがありました。本当にありがとうございます。
ありがとうございます。
今回はサンフランシスコで来てください。
うん。行きたいと思っています。
時間あれば、ぜひ、私たちは待ってます。それと次の映画も待ってます。いい映画を作ってください。
あり
はい、あり
がとうござい
がとうございます。
ます。
なんか他の、オーディエンスの質問ありますか？
最初に言ってくれていたプッシュポーズのタイトルの意味って話した方がいいですか？
どうぞ。
日本のタイトルがココでの話っていうタイトルなんですけど、ココでの話っ
うん、
ていうのは、3つの意味があって、ゲストハウスココの、
うん。
あと、日本語で個々人の話、自分自身、個人、
あ、個人
うん、個々人。
漢字は違いますね。
そう、漢字違います。あの、
漢字はちょっと難しいけど。
そう、一人一人の話っていうことを日本語で個々って呼びます。
うん。
それも意味としてあって、あと、here、ここでの話っていう3つの意味が日本語には込められてます。
その、2番目の意味は、違う漢字。それは自分の意味。
そう、自分っていう意味。
3番目の意味は
ここでの話、要は here、
場所。
うん、場所。それが、要、ゲストハウスここで、4人、全部で6人がお話しする休憩のご飯を食べるシーン。それが、ここでの話、here の話。
うん。
っていう意味を込めて、日本語のタイトルはここでの話にしてる。
So
で、
again, これは翻訳するのは大変難しいけど、the title of the movie and the title of the guest house, Coco,
うん、
Coco has a number of meanings. And Coco means here.
うん、
And again, that push pause here is really, really poignant. And the other is, and again, with the Japanese language and with the kanji characters, it sounds the same, but it's a different word, different characters. And for that, it means basically me. And it's this, it's jibun. That's the koko nibanme.
yes,
And
yes.
in the guest house, it meant here as in the place. So there were really a number of meanings, and really clear if you speak a little Japanese to be like, I get it. If you don't understand Japanese and you just see it's called push pause, the guest house is called Koko, this will go right over your head, but it's really important to the director and it's really important to the film. And again, as soon as I saw Guest House Coco, I thought, ココナッツじゃないですね。ここは、
あ、
ここだ。と
うん、
思ってた。And
そうそう。
it's really clear. But to a foreign audience, again, that's one of the things that would sail right over your head because even if it's translated, it's just there's a number of things with the language that are kind of tough. And this is one of them when words basically say the same thing, but you don't know until you kind of write the kanji to be like, koko, that koko, not this koko. And when you say this koko, I'm like, yeah, the guest house koko, of course, because it brought all of the people together. Like, this was, again, start to finish, this movie was fantastic and really clear and beautiful. So, again, thank you so much. And please do join us in San Francisco. Come and visit. We will show you around. Come and backpack. We will show you places to backpack. So, hope to see you in San Francisco. 今日本当にありがとうございました。
ありがとうございました。
じゃあ、また今度、
プッ
どうも。
シュポーズ、ごめんなさい。プッシュ
どうぞ。
ポーズの、プッシュポーズの意味もまだ喋れてなくて。
Okay, so we have more to say. Go
大
ahead.
丈夫。ごめんなさい。
どうぞどうぞどうぞ。
そう、日本語で3つの意味があるからこそ、海外のタイトルも多くの意味を持たしたかったっていうのがまず前提にあります。
どうぞ。
で、ポーズっていうのはまさに言った一時停止の、
ポーズで
うん、
今、 待ってるの意味。
そう。一時停止っていう意味で、それを自らプッシュするから、休憩っていう意味をつけたかったのと、止まってるのとプッシュするってすごく反対の言葉だと僕は思っていて、
プッシュの意味は、やってる。
プッシング、プッシング。
休憩。
そ
So it has, when you're talking about push pause, it has two conflicting meanings. And pause is chill and don't do anything. And push is make something happen. And those are the conflicting elements in the story, I think.
そう。まさにそれで、なんかちょっと違う意味なんだけど、この映画を象徴しているタイトルがプッシュポーズじゃないかなっていうふうに思ってつけました。
And so that was the reason why that the title was chosen, was that ultimately it fit well for the film.
ありがとうございます。
そう、多分
ごめんなさい。
若者が動きたいけど動けないコロナによって。だけど、そう、
That's classic. So young people wanted to move, but because of the COVID lockdown, they couldn't.
そう。で、
Yeah,
その
so
時
it
に、
was like forced on a lot of people where you wanted to move quickly, you wanted to go places, do things, see things, bars, restaurants, movie theaters, everything. Pause. And I think this movie speaks almost perfectly to that, where you have one, conflicting elements, and two, you have people throughout Japan who are unable to really do much of anything because everything has come to a screeching stop. And that's, beautifully portrayed in the film.
ありがとうございます。
じゃあ、
ありがとうございます。
本当にありがとうございます。
はい。
ありがとうございました。
じゃあ、また今度、どうもありがとうご
ぜ
ざいます。
ひ、
はい。さようなら。
ありがとうございます。
ありがとうございます。